Welcome to Coach's Corner of Michigan, Special Edition. I'm your host, Andy Weidenbach. We'll be talking to coaches, players, and other key figures in the hockey world. This podcast is brought to you by Stream Cortex for all your hockey needs. Our guest today is Sue McDowell, Commissioner of the Central Collegiate Women's Hockey Association and longtime women's hockey advocate, supporter, coach, and administrator. Welcome to the show, and thanks for joining us today.
Thanks so much.
So, Sue, tell us a little bit about your hockey journey.
I started my journey back, it feels kind of like the prehistoric age of girls and women's ice hockey. I started playing in the 1970s. I grew up in Massachusetts. I grew up out on Cape Cod, which back then was kind of a tourist and vacation destination. But I was pretty clear that I wasn't a figure skater early on. I was about 5'8" by the time I was 11, 12 years old, and I didn't possess a figure skater's grace. And I loved the sport of ice hockey. My folks were big Boston Bruin fans, as you can imagine, since we're only about an hour and a half away from Boston. And I didn't do it deliberately, but I was a huge Montreal Canadiens fan. So I didn't do it deliberately to cause family angst. But I thought Ken Dryden was magical in net, and I was absolutely entranced by the idea of being a goaltender. And really a lucky convergence for me at that period in time, because we had a new building right up the road from me was being built. The Cape Cod Coliseum housed some junior programs, junior leagues for kind of the farm teams for the Bruins and some other programs in New England. They were just building that, so they had a lot of ice and they had a lot of enthusiasm for hockey. Title IX was just there right in that same time period. So there's a lot of chatter about girls and women participating in what had been traditionally boys' sports. And then we had another parent in the community. So my dad wasn't the only person who had a daughter that was crazy enough to want to play ice hockey. And so my father and my colleague's dad formed a group and started the Cape Cod Aces. And the Cape Cod Aces girls hockey team was one of those groups that we had our practice on Saturday mornings. And then on Sunday, the other father had an RV, and he would drive from one end of the Cape to pick up our team members. And we would all drive the 45 minutes up to communities just outside of Boston. We were in a league in Canton, Massachusetts, and we would play our league games on Sunday, and then we would go home. And so we did that for the 6 years, sort of 2 years before, and then while I was in high school. And then I was fortunate enough, I went and played at Colby College in Waterville, Maine. They had a varsity women's team there. That was 1980 to 85, because I took a little time off during my academic career. But I was goaltender for them. And then I thought that was it. I thought I was pretty much done with hockey. I didn't have a degree in kinesiology. My degree was in comparative religions and Russian literature. Those are big sellers on the market when you're looking for your professional job. But I ended up coming out to Michigan to go to grad school. And after grad school and doing a little bit of work on the West Coast, I ended up back in Michigan for my professional career, and I missed hockey. And I found that the girls and women's ice hockey wasn't as prevalent as I thought it had been. Growing up in Massachusetts, you always saw the Michigan girls and women's teams at nationals, and I just assumed that Michigan had a girls team on every corner. And after I moved out here, I realized that it really wasn't as developed as I had thought. And so I started getting involved in that. I started finding, I found places to play. I found a senior women's team to play with in Ann Arbor. We played at the Yost Arena, just recreationally. Anybody who's been in senior hockey knows how quickly the word spreads when there's a new young goaltender in town that has any sort of goaltending experience. So I had some of the guys in town that were participating in men's leagues were very interested in getting a new goaltender on their roster. So I started playing with some of them. And little by little, other folks started to say, hey, you're a woman, you're playing hockey. Do you have any interest in coaching this or starting that? And I kept saying yes. I wanted a girls team to be with the Ann Arbor Hockey Association. So I worked with some people to start that. I worked with 3 other women because it was 1994 and we wanted the University of Michigan to have a women's college hockey team. And so we got their club team up and going. And then I was also involved in a whole bunch of senior women's teams because the Metro Skaters Women's Senior League had just gotten started a few years beforehand. And there was just a real interest in it. The Olympics in 1998 were the first sort of women's exposure as one of the national teams. And so I think hockey, and particularly girls and women's hockey, was really on a roll coming up in the mid-90s. So, and we've played all the way through. I hung up my skates in 2016. So still help coach, but as a player, my career is now moved back behind the bench or in the administrative office, I guess, to be more formal.
Yeah, you've been really busy and instrumental in promoting hockey for a number of years. Can you tell us how the girls' game has changed over the years since you started?
Boy, I think the number one thing for me is probably just the opportunities that are presented when you have numbers, right? When I grew up, there's just that one team. There were very few collegiate teams. It was up pretty much limited to the Northeast. It really has exploded in terms of, we dreamed about professional leagues. I can remember dreaming more about being in the NHL because it never occurred to me that we'd ever have enough people playing or enough backing to have a professional or pre-professional league. I think the actual mechanics of the game itself, as a coach, the one thing I notice is players are better younger. And I think that's because we can get younger players on the ice earlier. We get girls earlier, and they're not waiting until they're 14 or 15 before they start playing hockey now. And it's just, it's not the growth that I had hoped for when I first started adding teams. You have a vision in the 90s that every college will have a program and every school will support it in high school, and we'll have a national team and an NDTP for women. And we're not there yet. But I think that's the thing that I noticed the most is that there are pathways now where when I was growing up in the 70s and 80s, when I left college, I figured there'd be no way I'd continue to play ice hockey. There'd be no way I'd be involved. I didn't have a kinesiology major. I wasn't connected to the sport in any other way. And yet I've managed to be involved with it since then, pretty much perpetually. So I think that's a pretty impressive change.
Yeah, I know at the entry level, the numbers, like as you alluded to, the numbers are way up for girls, and I think that the explosion has taken place maybe the last, I'd say 15 years for sure, and there certainly is a lot more opportunities for girls, young girls, and at the college level now than there's ever been. So that's definitely a good thing. So I know you're involved in a lot of different aspects of hockey, and I was involved in high school hockey for girls when I was at Cranbrook for a period of time there. But can you tell us a little bit about girls high school hockey in Michigan and how that's developed over the years and maybe where it's at today?
Sure. I mean, that's so I just accepted the nomination as the high school vice president for the girls league, and we've got 19 teams with 2 more out there in the state that are interested. So that's probably a little different from when you were engaged with the programs. They are spread out still primarily for Detroit, but there are now some programs that are Traverse City area, mid-state area coming on board. So that's pretty exciting just to see it going across. I think the other really exciting thing for girls high school hockey is that we're working with MHSAA. So MHSAA doesn't recognize girls ice hockey as a formal sport within their organization yet. So that means they sponsor the state playoffs for the boys side of the sport, but they don't yet sponsor it for the girls. But we're working with them, and that's been a real positive relationship and trying to get to a place. We were able to have our girls state playoffs at USA Hockey Arena last spring. We had it in conjunction with the boys, and it was very well attended for us and a real eye-opener for some of the attendees and some of the athletic directors that were coming for the boys' side on the other rink. And we're in negotiation with them again to do the same thing this year. So just getting that visibility as a viable program and a viable option so schools recognize that it's something that they could commit to.
Yeah, I think that's great. I know when I was involved, back at Cranbrook, I know that the state required a minimum number of teams before they would recognize it as a sport.
Yep.
I can't remember what that number is, but it seems like it was like maybe 30 or something like that.
In the olden days when I talked to Jack Roberts, his number that he always quoted me was 72. Mark Ewell, Cody Ingalls have been a little softer on that number. Now it's more about how do we get athletic directors across the state to recognize this as a viable sport.
Yeah, I agree.
There's a lot of challenges in the high school athletic arena, right? There are a lot of expenses and there's a lot of pressures. So it's a matter of getting the athletic directors to recognize that it's viable and that there's a strong interest. And I think from the opposite side of things, having been a community organizer, particularly, I'm based in the Ann Arbor area, and we've had the Pioneer Girls High School team for many, many years. And then we had the Cooperative Huron Skyline team come on board a couple years ago, last year, really for the full season. We had a third team called Washtenaw United, and that picked up all the small schools that were ineligible for Pioneer, Huron, or Skyline. And one of the reasons we did that is that we saw the demographics, the families were more interested in it. Families used to be interested in, you started at house, maybe you progressed into travel, your goal was a tier 1 program, and you were travel, and that was sort of the penultimate of girls ice hockey, because you were assuming you're going to get that scholarship and go on to college with that. But what we found is that there are a lot of families, as their daughters are 12 or 13, they're looking at high school, they recognize the co-commitments that they have in high school these days. They recognize what the challenges are for them as they become college students and how many different ways their attention is being diverted. And so high school hockey for them becomes very, very appealing. And so I think in the last several years, there's been several teams that have come on board in our league because the girls are finding that by the time they're turning 12 or 13, they're looking at their freshman year. Maybe they stay with the 14U team that first year. But then they want to be part of their high school tribe. And kids in that developmental period are very excited about being a part of a high school program.
Yeah, it's definitely it definitely serves a purpose, and it's an extension of the classroom. You're part of your school. I think the being part of a high school team is an experience that is definitely worthwhile. And I coached, as you know, a lot of years in high school hockey, and it was a great experience for me as a coach. And I know our players really cherish those moments when you have the reunions every year and everybody gets together, and it's just a good experience. And it's nice to see that at least the state at the MSHA level is trying hard to get more teams and more schools interested in girls hockey. So that's a good thing. It is a challenge. I wish you luck on that. I know the MSHA moves slowly on things, but it's a big bureaucracy. But I'm sure that in time, if you're patient, you're going to reap the benefits of being part of the MSHAA. It's a great organization. I wanted to segue into college hockey. I know you're the commissioner of the Central Collegiate Women's Hockey Association. Can you tell us a little bit about your role as a commissioner and what's going on there in the CCWHA?
Sure. So I've been the CCWHA commissioner since 2019. I was actually involved with the U of M club team back when the CCWHA was formed in 1994. So I've been aware of it and familiar with it, over the decades. We are a 501c3 organization. So the commissioner's role, at least as I've been doing things over the last couple of years, has been really about the business of the organization, making sure we're complying with all of our state and IRS guidelines, making sure that our teams, all of which are part also of the ACHA, the American Collegiate Hockey Association, making sure those relationships are running smoothly. It's member driven, so each team has votes. So making sure that any league concerns that come up are handled appropriately and through due process. And then the other big part of my job is running a league tournament in February. The winners in that event get an auto bid to represent at nationals. So that's always sort of a penultimate event for the teams. So, and then I think the other thing that I try to do is a lot of as much outreach and hopefully objective outreach as I can for parents and players who are not yet in college. There are a lot of variations in the college hockey experience for women. And so making sure that people understand as they're coming up what all the alphabet soup of leagues and opportunities are, and what some of the pros and cons of those things are, which they probably receive knowing that I'm the CCWHA commissioner, so all of our teams are ACHA teams. But I was a former NCAA player, and I still stay in touch with that side of the programs. So I'd like to think that I can give them hopefully a little bit of an objective grasp on what their opportunities could be.
Are the college programs, are they reaching out to the travel girls programs and high school programs? Are they providing any special opportunities or promotions to try to get more girls interested?
They do. many of the college coaches are involved in whatever USA Hockey or regional camps there are. So, Michigan Amateur Hockey Association holds regional district camps for their girls. Mid-Am does for the Ohio, Indiana players, Illinois, those types of camps that are offered at the state level or at their regional level. Coaches in most of the ACHA, well, in every program, right, are focused on what is of benefit to them and to their team and putting together the strongest team they possibly can. Some of them offer camps. A lot of that got disrupted with COVID. It's still taking a little bit of time and effort and energy to get traction back again in that space now. Yeah,
COVID, it was a major setback at all levels of hockey, including the National Hockey League. So it was a big problem for a couple of years there. But I think we're past it now. And it looks like the dust is starting to settle and we're getting back to normal, whatever that is, or maybe the new normal.
I think that new normal, I mean, when you think of, if I'm going to host a camp, my new normal is I have to pay attention to where are people going to be housed and what are my protocols and what's the travel and how are those things expensed. And, it's a challenge and we'll get there. That will become the new normal and people will figure that all out, but it's still a little skippy.
Yeah, it is for sure. You've had your hand in a lot of different things in hockey for a number of years. What are some of the things you're most proud of that you've accomplished over your career?
I think one of the nice things about being involved in it for many, many years is just seeing that programs that I was a part of helping to found are still present. They're still providing opportunities. Girls and women are still playing, whether it be in youth programs or in high school level or in college teams, or even some of the senior women's teams in this area. It's fun to be able to reflect on the fact that many of those programs are still in existence and they're still offering opportunities for girls and women to play. I think the other always is a joy, as a coach, is reconnecting with your players, and seeing players that, we recently, right before COVID, we had an alumni reunion with the U of M college women team, and seeing some of those players that we were coaching in 1995 and 96 come back as professionals and as adults, or reconnecting with players that I may have coached when they were on a 16U or a 14U team, and they are now, they're now women who are bringing their families to the rink, either because they're part of their community or because they're coaching their daughter or son's team. I think those are always pretty compelling and pretty thrilling when they occur.
Yeah, it's always special when you hear from a former player, and they call you and tell you, where they've been and what they've been doing, and reminisce a little bit about the old days. It's always fun to reconnect. You're doing so many things. What keeps you going?
In thinking about that with the connection with players and thinking about how much social media plays into that these days, right? You can follow somebody's lifeline in Facebook and see how they're doing and how their family is doing. I think for me, it's always been about, hockey was a lifeline for me during some pretty turbulent teenage years. I didn't have anything traumatic. I was just a normal teen, but I think it was really a lifeline. It really connected for me. And that turned into an avenue where I've been able to make friendships and have connections and experiences around the world. I was lucky enough to go over to Finland in 2019. I've hosted some international teams when they've come here. So it's always opened doors that I have enjoyed walking through. And to me, that's really pretty compelling, is to give that opportunity to people that are younger than I am and make sure that those opportunities are present for them, no matter what level they're at. Right? Sport can be great for the kid who's just starting out and maybe never plays it as a college player. Maybe they always just enjoy it recreationally and maybe they continue doing it as an adult. But if it gives them a good place to be healthy and be themselves, then I'm fine with that. I always sort of wish there were more of those in this world. I think hockey and I think a lot of sports, but particularly hockey, it gives you a place to work some things out, right?
Oh, absolutely.
We all have stresses and anxieties and need teammates. So I think that's part of what makes it so compelling for me.
Yeah, so we talked about college hockey and a little bit, women's college hockey, and I'm sure there's some listeners out there that are interested in playing college hockey. So those would be the players that want to go on and maybe get a little more serious about hockey, try to get a college education, play a little longer at a highly competitive level. What advice would you give them?
I think my first thing is, I think young athletes who are probably coming into high school or in high school now probably get tired of people telling them to do their research. But I really can't emphasize that enough, and to be very, very careful about the promises that they hear. There's a lot of places that women can play ice hockey nowadays, but you really do need to do your homework on what the different types of opportunities are. I mean, the NCAA is divided into D1 and D3 based on school enrollment and budget. That means something in terms of the types of teams they can offer and the types of collegiate support they give those programs. When you get into the ACHA, it's a little more varied. There are some schools that are at the D1 and D2 levels where they fully support the program and they've got a long history and they hire the coaches and they provide all of the infrastructure. And then there are some programs that are very student driven. And I think navigating that space for parents and their athletes can be a bit of a challenge. It feels kind of like an alphabet soup in terms of, well, what's an NCAA and what's an ACHA and who the heck is a CCWHA? But I think that doing some research on that, the nice thing is you've got the web, right? So there's all types of ways that you can go do your research on schools and on coaches and on records and team records and see where players came from in the past and see what they're looking for. I think that's, and then you have to be aware that how do you fit into that coach's plans? And I think it's hard, particularly for today's high school athletes, to feel confident about saying to a coach, so where are you going to use me? Why are you interested in me on your team? But I think that's a question they need to be prepped and ready to ask. And I think they also need to be prepped and ready to answer, why I chose your school, right? What was it about your school or your team or you as a coach that makes me interested in contacting you? So I think that's, the whole scouting and college scholarship world for girls and women is a little different than it is on the boys' side of the game. Certainly NCAA program's been around forever. That's a pretty well-known thing. If people are interested in those types of opportunities, I can't stress enough that they should be going to the NCAA website and make sure they understand what their eligibility requirements are for those schools. They start early in high school. You can't catch up on those by the time you're a senior. So if that's at all, and it costs nothing and hurts no one to just participate, right? You can go there and learn and understand what NCAA is and what your options are there. I think if that feels like that's not the right direction for any of a number of reasons, I think that there are other platforms. There are groups like the NCSA or there's scholarshipstats.com. There are platforms like Stream Cortex where you can promote yourself. You can put information out there and then you can contact the coaches that you think you might be interested in playing for or the schools where you think you might want to go and link them to your sites. I'm not a huge proponent of recruiters and recruiting services. They're just starting to get a foot on the girls' programs. Frankly, I feel like most parents and their athletes could do the same thing that the recruiters could do and be better spokespersons for themselves without having to pay the money for that. But if you prefer to do the shortcut and have somebody else do the work for you, I guess I can't judge that too harshly. But I think the young athlete looking for collegiate hockey, it has always been a myth that a certain path will guarantee you a certain scholarship at a certain institution. I have heard that since when I was a student, right? I think we all have. If you play for X college, then if you're tier 1 on this team, then you'll get a scholarship at this school and it'll be a full ride scholarship and it'll be the magic $140,000 you need to go to Providence, right? Or wherever. And I would say that those are very few and far between. They always have been. Most college coaches divide their scholarships pretty frugally. There are, I think as of 2020, there were only 35 women from Michigan that actually were in the NCAA D1 and 80 in NCAA D3. And that's out of, a couple thousand athletes. So do your research, be aware of what you're looking for and really know why you want to go to those schools. just saying I want to go because I got a hockey team. Well, guess what? There's 32 NCAA D1 teams. Why this one? Be ready to answer that question for those coaches.
Yeah, it's very confusing, and you touched on this briefly. I know in boys hockey, boys that are moving out of AAA or maybe high school, a lot of those kids get hooked up with a family advisor,
right?
Somebody to help them navigate through the process,
right?
And like anything else, some of the advisors do a great job, and some of them don't do such a great job. It's just like any other walk of life. But I know it's so confusing sometimes if you're new to hockey that, it may be easier to have a family advisor than it would be to try to do all this research yourself. Somebody that has some familiarity with the process and the system. Yep. So I know you touched on this briefly and said that, the girls are just kind of scratching the surface on this, but is it very prevalent that the girls would be using this service like that?
It's just starting to get a toehold, and it's been a mixed, as you say, there are people who do it very professionally and are probably very good advisors, particularly if your family is not familiar with the college hockey environment, or you're insecure about the college application process as a whole. But there are also some family advisors out there that I think are not really providing much different than what any family member could do for themselves and for their daughter. So I think that's a buyer beware market right now. There aren't a lot of, it's like other professions, right? There aren't a lot of there isn't a professional certification necessarily that those advisors need to clear, and so it's just sort of buyer beware. Be aware of what you're agreeing to, and be very skeptical about what they are offering. I have heard, unfortunately, some anecdotal stories recently about people who have come, and they're offering, you'll be seen by X number of colleges and you'll get at least a half scholarship to Y school. And I'm unaware of anybody who can guarantee those things. So just be careful where you're putting your money and in what direction you're choosing to get that kind of support.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I've seen a lot of situations in boys hockey where, those promises are, can be very disappointing, just because, they, like you said, they split those scholarships up and they try to get the maximum of bang for their buck as in a college. They want to get as many good players in there as they can. So, yeah, you have to be careful.
I think that's one of the it's an eye-opener, right? You've been playing ice hockey, you love ice hockey, you're excited about your team, you're having a good time with your coach, you're excited about the future. Your parents hopefully are supportive and excited about your future as well. And it's not that student athletes have got a Pollyanna approach, but I think sometimes that families forget that from the college perspective, you are tuition dollars, right? You are if they're a good school, I shouldn't say that. If they, in one direction, there are schools that are very interested in you as a student athlete, and they're very, very interested in your capabilities and how they fit into the program and how that school will benefit you as a young person, right? Whether the academic programs are right, whether the other sports are right, whether your interests are right in terms of urban campus, rural campus, large school size, small school size. Probably about in 2015, I think it was, the president of Adrian College wrote a book called Crisis in Higher Education, a plan to save small liberal arts colleges in America. And it really spoke to the success that Adrian has had in finding a sponsor and bringing in many, as they have, 7 ice hockey teams now, I think, at Adrian. But it spoke to how, really from the business side, and it was eye-opening because for me, we wanted to look at it as the sport we all love. But in reality, schools and colleges sometimes think of it as a revenue stream, right? And if I have 20 women playing on this team, then that nets me X number of revenue dollars in tuition, and the return on investment on that is $1.5 million over the course of 4 years. And so, of course, I'm going to invest in that. And that's maybe a little different perspective than most parents have when they're looking for schools for their kid. You know, they're looking at, and certainly different perspective than the kids have got. You know, they're looking for the great pictures on Instagram and who's having the best TikToks. So it's just kind of matching those two things, matching the fact that the schools are often businesses, and just like any business, you want to be very deliberate about how you investigate them and how whether they are or aren't the right fit. While at the same time not losing your enthusiasm for that sport. I mean, it's not all doom and gloom in economics and business side. It's just that it makes the landscape very very flexible and changeable, and people just want to be aware of that. I mean, I always laugh with the ACHA teams because we do have a number of schools that support their programs, their women's programs, and they hire their coaches. But those coaches change. And so if you've come to, and there are schools that don't hire the coaches, the actual student athletes hire the coaches. So if you happen to be approached by a coach that you think is really phenomenal and you're at a tournament and you're really excited and it gives you something to talk about with your teammate, hey, Coach Jones talked to me and this is like the greatest thing and I can go play there and it's fantastic. And by the time you go through the whole rigmarole, it turns out that Coach Jones isn't coaching there anymore. Then that can be a real letdown, and it can be something that could be avoided by doing a little bit of research ahead of time in terms of, is that really the right school for you to go to? Or did you just kind of get so excited about the fact that you might be able to play hockey at the college level that you didn't pay attention to where you were doing it and why you were doing it?
Yeah, it's a big decision for sure. And I know you spoke about Adrian, and I know years ago they had investors and they decided to, make hockey part of their major focus, and it brought attention to their school.
Yep.
I think you're right. I think they have 7 teams now, and they get a lot of dollars in revenue because of it. But they spent a lot of money on the front end.
Yeah.
Building that program and building that rink out there. And then Shattuck St. Mary's did something similar at the prep school level. The school was in kind of financial danger for a while, and they spent a lot of money on the front end, getting players in there and so forth and building an identity. Yep. And now Shattuck is, like world renowned as far as the prep schools. And I think Adrian has that same sort of look at the college level. They've done a fantastic job of marketing their program and providing a lot of opportunities because they certainly have enough places to play. So,
and I certainly don't want to come across as taking anything away from schools that are doing that, right? I mean, I think some of those smaller liberal arts schools that have added women's ice hockey have been a godsend for our sport because they do open up the opportunities for girls to play that were previously not present. And I think they're doing so, I think my point is only that for parents and for their players, you want to be aware of what you're getting into, right? You want to know that that's a particular perspective, and make sure you know that the sport, if you're not doing, make sure you know to the best of your ability how well supported the program, the ice hockey program, is in the school that you're interested in attending. I think that's...
Yeah, I agree. And numbers are important as well. So a lot of those boys I know that go to Shattuck St. Mary's in hopes of playing on the prep team, right, they end up possibly playing on the second or third team because they're so deep in talent that
right,
they never get an opportunity to play on the big team, and they're disappointed. So you touched on this before, that you have to pick the right school for you.
Yeah.
And so let's talk about the pipeline a little bit. So for boys, boys grow up, they play AA or AAA hockey. They could play prep school hockey or maybe high school hockey. And then typically the pipeline for boys, if you're good enough, you play a year or 2 or 3 of junior hockey, and then you go to a Division I or Division II or a Division III NCAA program, or maybe you play at a good club hockey team. What's the pipeline for girls? What's the process?
So I'm going to try and make this not Michigan centric, but that's the area that I know deepest. I mean, we still have sort of that same, the start is the same in terms of your local community hockey programs and your youth hockey. Certainly there are travel programs. Girls is tier 1, 2, and 3, with tier 1 being sort of the highest aspiration. Tier 1s and 2s, you're looking at trying to get to nationals. You're looking at the USA Hockey development camps that are offered, or regional development camps that are offered, to try and make sure that coaches are seeing you. The coaches that are participating on staff at those camps are getting a chance to see you, and you're getting a chance to play with other girls. And it may be one of the few times when you're playing with people that aren't your teammates, but are also at that same skill level. Certainly the US development camps are probably one avenue for our elite players, because those are held in St. Cloud every year. And so that's an opportunity for emerging elite players at the younger, like 14 years old, to really get some traction with seeing how they fit against other girls of their age who are not necessarily their teammates. There are some people who do post-grad years. It's smaller now. I don't hear as many families. I mean, as high school sports have emerged across the Midwest, I hear fewer people going into postgraduate programs on the East Coast as their venue to the NCAA teams, or as their track to NCAA. I think now it tends to be more, if they're tracking to the NCAA D1, then you're looking for those athletes who have made a commitment in high school that ice hockey is their number one sport, and they are making sure that they are attending camps where they're going to be seen by D1 coaches, and they're making sure that they are in touch with those coaches and know that they are the right fit for that program. Certainly for D3, NCAA D3, I think those athletes are often the ones who have got multiple activities that they plan to continue in college. So they may be, multi-sport athletes who are looking for that balance between sports, between seasons, or they perhaps have some other activity that is taking their interests in addition to their ice hockey. And I think for them, they too are doing sort of that track, trying to make sure that their schools and coaches that they're interested in are aware of them, particularly as they're moving into their junior, senior years of high school. And all of those players, plus the players who maybe have not been tracking on a tier 1 team or a high tier 2 team, are certainly of interest to the ACHA teams. So the ACHA teams sometimes have a hard time wooing away NCAA D1 candidates to their schools, because the premise around the NCAA D1 is pretty strong, right? That's the pinnacle of a lot of the girls and women's program. But the ACHA teams do get girls that, for whatever reason, aren't interested in Tier 1 hockey. We have a number of NCAA, Big Ten schools that in this area that have ACHA women's ice hockey teams. They don't have varsity women's ice hockey. And they get girls who are interested in going to Michigan State, the University of Michigan, Penn State for academic and networking opportunities and future careers that they're looking forward to. But then they have a nice opportunity to include ice hockey with them still. So it's really I think it's a little more mixed bag than what the boys experience on their side, which could be a good thing or a bad thing, I guess. It depends. It probably makes it more confusing if you're an athlete in the middle. You have any number of options, and the track, the top of the pyramid for the girls is perhaps just as tight and just as difficult as it is for the boys, in the sense as if your goal is to be on the USA national team, then that's the track where you've got to be in those USA Hockey developmental skates during the summer. You've got to be in the national team program, and that's probably pretty early. That's a very early thing. And so that's a very limited elite athlete perspective.
Yeah, I think you're right there. I mean, it's a big commitment if you want to get to the highest level. And in all my years of coaching, I always have one question when I speak to my players, and it's always, how much are you willing to sacrifice?
Yeah.
Because that's what it all boils down to. How much are you willing to sacrifice? And I think I'm down here in Florida now, and I've been coaching down here a little bit. And the guys I'm coaching are 17 to 19 years old, and they don't know what they don't know.
Right.
And that's part of the problem. But, as they start gravitating up the ladder here, they find out that, it really is a big sacrifice to get to the highest level. And I think it's probably the same in all facets of hockey.
Yeah.
No difference in girls hockey.
No, I mean, I've tried to share information. We'll have it on the website for the CCWHA, but I try to get out in front of some of the parents at some of the USA Hockey events and point out to them that, in Michigan, we've got 600 girls that are registered with USA Hockey that are in that, probably 13 to 17 age range. So you think about 600 athletes playing, and about 100 of those go on to NCAA teams. So that's a pretty tight breaking point on that.
Oh, yeah.
And I think the other thing that I try to emphasize for them is my last conversations with a couple of D1 NCAA coaches is their expectation is it's a 32 to 40 hour a week job. And it's a 32 to 40 hour a week job 12 months a year. So you're not doing something differently in the fall or in the spring. You're in a preseason training program or a postseason recovery program and a summer program. And, the expectations are just different. And for some athletes, that's exactly what they've always wanted. That's what that's what they've dreamed about. But I think if there are other athletes out there that are not sure that that's the commitment they're ready to make, that's okay. There's places they can continue to play college hockey without necessarily having to follow the same path as their teammate.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the beauty of it. Is there are many opportunities in hockey, both in men's and women's hockey, as you gravitate up the ladder, and you don't have to make as big of a commitment if you want to play club hockey or maybe even intramural hockey as you get older and play in college. There's a lot of intramural teams that play now, so there's a lot of opportunity. So as we wind this thing up here. If you could wave your magic wand and fix something or make some changes in girls' youth hockey or women's hockey, what would it be?
Oh, the problem with being involved in many different directions is having a wand that I wish could go in many different directions. It would be fantastic if we could figure out a way to make it cheaper ice time so more kids could be involved earlier and a little bit longer. And I know that's, that hits on the economics of being a rink owner, and that's a difficult place to be. So I'm not asking for gifts, but if it's a magic wand, it would be a way for it to be more accessible for more athletes. And I think that probably continues on all the way up. I think my other magic wand would be, we're in a catch-22 right now. There are a lot of young girls who are starting to play, and they need to see paths all the way up through the professional levels, right? We've finally got some professional programs. We've got post-collegiate graduate leagues that girls can play in, women can play in. But seeing those pathways are challenging. And the place we find some challenges are that we just don't get a lot of traction in more of the big name collegiate venues. So, we don't see University of Washington putting on, 4 varsity women's programs or several, 4 or 5 different teams. You don't see, they're not following an Adrian model because they're not really necessarily worried in enrollment numbers because they have plenty of people that apply there. So it's not the same draw to them as it might be to an Adrian to set up a team. And hockey is an expensive sport. Hockey is a very expensive sport on a professional level. And so my magic wand would be that release of the funding barrier, so that people could see a more obvious path from the thing they started and loved when they were little to a way to continue to play it without having to skip through their late high school or college years because they can't fight in the right fit.
Yeah. Is there anything we didn't cover that maybe you'd like to talk about?
I think just for the girls out there that are playing, I think, stay with it if you enjoy it. Make sure you're finding others that support your dreams. I think make sure you're spending some quiet time with somebody you trust to be honest about what your abilities are and where you're trying to go, particularly in sports where we're both growing, but we're also still a small community. And sometimes the danger with that is we look to the left and the right and we think, oh, we're not tracking like she is, or we're not doing what he is doing, or maybe we're not this, or maybe we're not that. Find your supporters who can have honest conversations with you about what your current abilities are, and then start looking for ways to grow that help you get to where your dreams are. And I think there are a lot of people out there that can support you, but make sure you're not judging yourself too harshly. Make sure you're looking around and telling people, this is what my goal is and this is what I'd like to do, so that they can tell you, like we just said a little bit ago, Andy, well, this is the kind of work it's going to take. And maybe that work is exactly what you want. But first of all, make sure you enjoy it. It's a fantastic sport, but you want to make sure you're happy every day you step on the ice.
Yeah, fun is the optimum word there. You've got to enjoy it and have fun along the way.
Yep.
And there are many opportunities and more coming. But thank you so much for sharing your journey with us and all your insight on women's hockey and spending some of your valuable time to be with us today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the opportunity.